Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, hitting you with another video, and this one's going to kind of piggyback off of the video that I made on Saturday, the 18th of 2022, where I talked about inside my 65 Lincoln Continental, the amp gauge. This is kind of going to be a couple parts. What I'm going to do here is first look at a couple things on the internet, and then I'm going to jump over and actually show you photos from my 64 on what we decided to do to remedy the potential issue. If you go out and do an internet search for like 1964 Lincoln Continental amp gauge, which you'll actually see here in this tab, this one, although I use Safari, you'll see here is the Google search, which is typically what I use. And I searched 1964 Lincoln Continental amp gauge service bulletin. I was trying to find the bulletin. I didn't have it handy. And what you'll land on is a couple things. One is this website, which is bigfancycar.blogspot.com. And I don't know if the guy's still around. He would always do some pretty cool write-ups. He's got some cool videos on his YouTube channel, and also the lincolnforum.net. Now, I talk about the Lincoln Forum all the time, and a lot of people probably in the social media world that we live in are mostly on Facebook, but the forums are still fantastic. And if you look at, for instance, I searched amp gauge bulletin, that's what I was looking for. You'll find a bunch of threads here, including this one, no power in car. And if you scroll up, you'll see this goes back to like a post over 10 years ago. And Big Fancy Car, also the same guys whose website that we're getting ready to look at, he also would chime in on these posts as well, and you'll sometimes see his little avatar through here. But obviously this was a kind of a big topic for a long time, and the reason why I want to do this video is I want to show you guys so that you can avoid a potential issue with your cars. Now, this is specific to 64, 65. The best way to think about it is those are the years that have that certain style dash. 1, 2, and 3 had a different dash. 4 and 5, they had their awesome interiors. And then, of course, in 66, they changed that. But here, if we look at Big Fancy Car, this post says 60 Continental weak spot or weak point number 2, burn. The 4 and 5 Continental has 3 weak points. Their potential for damage can be summarized as clunk, burn, and crash. Today we address number 2, the burn. So in this blog post, he says the in-dash emitter, I believe is how you pronounce it, or amp gauge is what it's referred to as, is notorious for having corroded terminals. We'll see that in a few minutes when we look at my photos. This causes weird electrical problems. It has also proven to be a fire hazard. That's why I kind of titled my YouTube video yesterday, Fire Hazard. Many 4s and 5s have burned to the ground. Now, nobody knows the exact number, but we have seen, and if you talk to folks like I'm sure Chris at Lincoln Land, over the years, there's been dash fires in some of these cars. I was driving in Tony Boss Boland's 65 Lincoln Continental shortly after he bought it back in 2017, October, and the car died out on a dark night down kind of a pretty dark road. Luckily, we were able to pull into a little service station and leave the car, but it's literally, I've been in a car where it's shorted out. He goes on to say, obviously could have burned to the ground, and it's because the amp gauge or amp meter is shorted to ground. In effect, the chrome dash panel, he kind of talks about, got real hot, I think, in his example. To add insult to injury, this is a non-fused circuit, so there's no safety there, if you will. He talks about heading home from a car show. I saw smoke coming from the dash. The ammeter, I believe is how you say it, needle was all the way to the right. I pulled over immediately and turned the engine off. The chrome dash bezel was very, very hot. The top right corner had melted, and the whole thing was discolored. I decided to disconnect the wiring from the loom, but to keep it installed in the dash, of course, I cut both of the wires at the back of the gauge. We'll look at this with my photos in my example and connected them together. He did install a 70 amp fuse between the battery and the starter. Better to be safe than sorry. So the other thing I wanted to look at here is this is one page of the service bulletin. So you see page 4 of 6, and you can Google this if you want this for your record. But down here, it talks about trouble, the gauge shorts to ground, cause terminal not cutting through terminal insulation. And it's kind of a brief description. Install flat washer, and it kind of shows this. You see this insulator right here. That's the only thing that is between the metal items there. So it's a little insulator. And I do believe there's another one. I was trying to find it. I think there's either another page, but it shows, and you'll see in my photos, it shows like a thicker black insulator. And someone could chime in. I want to say that was not factory until the service bulletin, until I started having more issues. But again, I'll show you what it looks like in my photos in a few minutes. But that's what I wanted to go over, at least here. And again, if you go on lincolnforum.net or, of course, in Facebook groups, just search amp gauge. And you'll see here, when I searched amp gauge bulletin, it was only one page, not a lot of stuff. If I were to just search amp gauge, their website has been down a little bit, I think, kind of doing some back end behind the scenes type things. But while this is loading, I'll mention Bernski, that is Pat Tian on here, and he has a great he has a great write up that we'll look at here in a second. You can see this is running really slow, so I'm gonna jump out of that. But I'll refer to this in a few minutes because it converted amp gauge to volts, and this is Pat. So we've had him on Lincoln Addict podcast. Obviously big person in the community from a Lincoln standpoint. He literally, and I tried this and I wasn't successful. I'm not good at doing some of these little things sometimes. But what he did was I ordered the same gauge, this boat gauge, and all of this gets thrown away except for the little this piece right here. You basically disassemble it and you've got your little orange that looks nearly identical to what's in your car. And then you've got this guy here. And I went through all of this and I wasn't able to get mine to kind of fit when I started putting the dash back. It just didn't like the spacing here. And I even tried to trim all this out and I didn't have any success. So I didn't end up going this route, but you can look right here when this is in the dash. You can't even tell that this has been changed. I mean, nobody would be able to notice that. And, of course, it looks pretty good. So I'll put a link in the video to this if you ever wanted to try it. It's worth, I guess, doing if you wanted to try this, and then maybe like if you end up doing what I did where you just say, you know what, forget about it. Now, I do also have one that Blair Farmer rebuilt, and I talk about there's 3 options. You can bypass it, you can have it rebuilt, it being the amp gauge, or you can go with Dakota digital gauges. Those are the main 3 fixes. So let's look at my photos now here of what I did in the 64. Okay, we're now over at my photos, and what I did was I went back recently. I tried to put all of my stuff in albums, and what I did is I put any photos back from when I was working on this project in my 64. I put them in a album, and we're going to look at those now. First off, a lot of people, I think if you're visual like me, you hear people talk about stuff and you think, yeah, what's the big deal? It's always worked. I'm not going to have issues. Okay, this is the first photo, and here's some visual evidence. You can see here where, whatever you want to call this little insulation starts to break off over time. And again, I'm not an electrical specialist, but people can tell you, if you've ever bought an old car and you've had some real nasty corroded battery cables and you see all that green corrosion inside them, and you go, okay, I mean, it's pretty simple. You put a new battery cable or ground cable on, things like that, from the heat and the power and the, cranking in different conditions and whatever. But when you look at this, I can't really tell you, other than 50, 60 plus years, it's going to cause some deterioration. And what you're going to see here is something that could very well cause a fire in one of these cars. So here, these little guys here, if you've never taken this apart, you end up taking these couple of screws out. I think there's 1, 2, 3, and you can see the little notch here. That's so your screwdriver kind of fits straight in. When you take those off, this little plastic piece just comes right off, and then you're left with this. This is what the gauge looks like. This is the amp gauge in particular. So you can see over here, you still got the little plastic piece on. 1, 2, 3, I think it was. The 3 screws come out, 2 or 3 screws. Yeah, here's the other one up here. And, this looks fine. This, you can tell here, isn't looking so hot. And this, you could just see, anybody visually, you're going to look at this and go, okay, this needs to be remedied, okay? You could see here on the opposite side how this insulation is just cracking off. And all, like Pat has always reinforced, all of the power that comes from the battery that goes into your car to feed any accessories and the dash lights and all that, all of that power is coming right through here. So if this dies out and this causes a fire, that could be a bad thing. But also, once this, not when, but once this goes out, you're going to lose power in the car. And when I was driving the 65, literally the car just died. I was driving down dark night. A guy kind of comes up behind me. He's like, hey, your headlights are off. And I'm thinking, I thought he was like waving to say, hey, nice car or whatever. And right after he passed me, I was like, what's going on? And I pulled into a little area, and sure enough, further investigation revealed in Tony's 65, this was a blue car that he had this, where it basically finally just gave out, all that power going through there. This is the backside. So you see this insulator. I know somewhere in my archives I've got something that shows that, I don't know if it was the late 60s or 70s, that Ford, Lincoln Motor Company, Ford Moco, whatever, they came out, I believe, so keep me honest, I know some folks will have the history. I believe this was an extra insulator that came out. I've seen some with this, and I've seen some without it. That's another reason why I want to say that that this was an extra item. This right here are your 2 wires that come into it. So you've got this nice 90 bend here, and you can see this is a real good connection. Okay, so you've got 1 and 2, and you've got your little screws, and those tighten down really well. You would look at it from the back and go, yeah, there's really no issue. But again, if you look at it from the front, clearly you can tell that this is kind of on the verge of going out. Again, it could be rebuilt. This could be re-insulated and cleaned, and it'll make sure that this will never ground out. There's a couple other things that Blair does. You could do that, or you could do what I ended up doing here, which you're going to see in a minute. This is with it taken apart. And I'll tell you, when you come back here and you have to take off that big main bezel, that's not too hard. I mean, there's a bunch of screws you'll take out. I ended up taking out, you'll see a photo in a few minutes, the lower dash panel as well. But when you start getting in here, this is really, really tight. And I took the radio out, I want to say, if I remember correctly, and I put my phone back there to take this photo. When you take the radio out, you've got that little bit of area that you can get in here. Okay, and that's what you're left with there. I did have to go, and I think I ended up buying these. This is a kind of a shorter 3/8 wrench, so I did not have a shorty, so to speak, and this really aided in me taking the amp gauge out. You can see there another photo, and again from the back, doesn't look bad. You have to take these 2 screws off, and then this piece is going to pop out. Once you do that, I think you have to do it, I'm trying to remember, on both sides, but what you're going to see right here is where I'm kind of pulling on it to see if I can, get this out, and what I want it to be able to see. And you can see like right where these guys are at. Once you're taking this apart, it'll kind of make a little bit more sense, but I know you've got 3 on this side for your other gauge. I think this is the only one where, you got to spend a little bit more time on the back side of it. Okay, here it is removed, and you can see just how burnt this area looks right here. This is the insulation, as we saw in the service bulletin, and again, you can just see how bad and corroded and nasty this is. So you can make a decision on what you want to do there. And I took some more photos. Okay, here it is on the table we had at the time. Pretty nasty. And anybody would tell you, I mean, listen, you got a car, if you look at the values on these through Haggerty's website, the values continue to go up, whether you've got a sedan or a convertible. There's no reason to not take one of those steps to fix your car. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through all this, but basically here's what I ended up doing. I bought the same gauge that Pat did, and I went through and I went and bought a Dremel. I did not have one, and I modified this. You have to cut this little area, and you can see right here, pretty simple. You can mount it up nicely, okay? I don't have a lot of patience when it comes to this kind of stuff, but this part was pretty simple. Like, to be honest with you, this would then make it a voltmeter, okay? That's using the boat deal. The thing was, for whatever reason, it did not like when I tried to put everything back together, it did not like what I thought was the spacing here. Okay. Pat apparently had no issues. And if you look back at his thread, he didn't really notch into any of this stuff. I took the Dremel and I continued to cut away, and I cut away and I cut away and more and more and more. And I could not get the gauge to want to all go back in there and fit where it was supposed to. So I got frustrated and I said, I'm not dealing with that anymore. I'm going to go to my other plan. Now, I do have a gauge that's been rebuilt, but it's kind of a long story. What I opted for was to bypass it. So this was back on July 12th, 2019. Taking all this stuff apart looks more frustrating than it really is. Taking the lower dash is probably the harder part, I would say, because you have to, depending on how far you want to take it out. I left it kind of dangling in here, which made it a lot easier. And then we could work here, of course, on the seats, and we could get in right here. This is where the amp gauge goes, okay? Here's what we ended up doing. My buddy Paul came over. He's way better at soldering. For some reason, I'm just not good at it. I don't think I wait long enough for it to get hot enough for it to soak in the solder. And I did not get a super clear photo after. But what we basically did is, you could see where Paul's at right here. We soldered. Yeah, this is the closest photo I got. He soldered these two wires together, okay? And when those get soldered, what we ended up doing is we put a bunch of electrical tape around it. Now, you could do a big butt connector. You could do some sort of like little lug type connector or something like that. You know, I had a couple of different things. My thing was, soldering it together. I know it's going to be a good connection. It's not going to come apart. And I knew that we could do the electrical tape on it. The reason why I wanted to do that was, again, just to bypass it. And I thought to myself, at the end of the day, I'd rather not have an issue. But at the same time, if you look back at my video from yesterday with the ashtray here, you can put in a little voltmeter there. And the way Pat's always kind of talked about it is, I think the best description I've heard it say is the amp gauge, it's basically in series. So it is reading from from inside, if you will. So when you look at, I'm trying to find the photo here. When you look at like this, for instance, it's between this connection and this connection, right? That's where your gauge is at. When you have a voltmeter, like what I put or what Robert installed in the 65 Lincoln Continental, the red car I have, that is like tapped in to said source, and it's looking from the outside to go, okay, what's the reading? So, if you really want your car to be original, take it apart, have this rebuilt. I can get you in contact with Blair Farmer. He's in Clearwater. You have to take your gauge out and mail it to him, and he will rebuild it. He's one of the best out there. If you don't really care, you could bypass it, and this gauge is going to stay straight up and down, okay? Nobody's going to ever know. If somebody said, well, let's say you oversold your car and you wanted to tell the person, hey, this gauge doesn't work. You just need to open your glove box, and then you've got your voltmeter right there. You can even get battery terminals, like kind of the aftermarket car stereo type ones, which again, they're not going to be aesthetically the same as maybe like the factory stuff, but they even have the volt gauge built into that. So there's a couple of different things. You could put something in your glove box if you really wanted to, but just please, if nothing else, take heed and do something, because if you just go, hey, it'll be fine. My buddy's got a 64, 65, and he said, don't worry about it, whatever. You just don't want to, number one, break down. And number two, you don't want to have a fire or something like that. If you think about it, a lot of times people complain. They're like, oh, I want a new engine in my car. I don't want to break down, whatever. People drove these cars all the time and they never broke down, okay? When they get to 60 years old, like where we're at now, they're 60 plus years old, you're going to have things that have to be done, right? The points are going to have to be changed or upgraded to, aftermarket, Pertronics. In this case, why break down for something that, is going to basically take you like an afternoon to take apart, a couple of hours, peeling everything apart, and then deciding, hey, do you want to go with Dakota Digital gauges? Number one, that's one of your choices. Number two, do you want to bypass it like I did? I showed you there. You could solder it together. Or number three, you can send yours out and get it rebuilt by Blair Farmer, or I guess like 3.5/4, and we'll call it 4 for sake of our homie Pat. You can go and you can upgrade it to something like this. Now, for whatever reason, like I said, I spent a lot of time doing it. I wanted to kind of handle it with kit gloves, so to speak, and I just could not get it to go back in there. I did have extra dash pieces, so this was an extra kind of old one that I had that I wanted to try it. And, it didn't work, but hey, I did this, and I was just as happy to have it remedied. So there's Paul soldering in. Again, that's what it looks like at the end. A lot of good electrical tape and set to go. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. 6465 amp gauge. Spend the time, remedy the issue so you don't break down. And if you want to Google Dakota Digital Lincoln Continental gauges, there is the instructions are on their website and you can read through them. If you want to kind of get an idea if that's something you want to do, you do have to go and take out and kind of trim this back panel in some places for the gauges to fit in there. But a lot of people love those gauges. They're modern gauges, and that's an option as well. So ODB, the Lincoln Addict, take care, and don't forget to check out LincolnAddict.com. Order a shirt or sticker. The stuff will be shipping in 1 to 2 weeks. Can't wait. Take care. Peace.